it was almost like because I thought, well, now I flipped the way I see reality. And so it's almost like those pictures you look at. It's like once you see it, you can't unsee it. That was the feeling I had. I was like, now I'm seeing reality this way. I can't unsee it. And so I definitely thought the weed was had everything to do with this. I didn't even know depersonalization was a thing. Honestly, I thought it was just I thought these feelings should only exist on the marijuana. And I still had continuous feelings of feeling like I was almost in a dream. It got so bad that I couldn't even walk down to our public mailbox without feeling panic symptoms because I didn't, I think my biggest fear at the time was, either passing out while I was out somewhere, just kind of losing my mind almost. I thought if I went to a certain place and I would just lose control. I actually remember I had distorted thoughts about time, thinking that time was just going to speed up faster and faster. The thing that people say, time gets faster as you get older. I literally thought like time was just going to just speed up super fast and my life was just going to like almost flash. And I don't know, the thoughts sound pretty ridiculous looking back, but at the moment, it felt so real.
Hey everyone, I'm Sean O'Connor, author of the Depersonalization Manual, and today I'm speaking with Caden Atkins from Colorado in the US. Caden is 17 years old, and for 2 years he suffered with chronic depersonalization disorder triggered by a bad weed experience. As Caden once wrote to me in an email, quote, "I felt like my vision was delayed, almost like I was floating through space. I felt like at any moment I was going to lose feeling in my body and pass out." Fortunately, Caden has since made a complete recovery, and he's with us today to talk about his experience with and recovery from depersonalization disorder. Caden, you're very welcome to the channel, and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me on here. It's been just a pleasure to be able to do this. I've been watching, I've been on your manual and I've been watching YouTube videos for so long. And not only is it an excitement to actually meet you on a Zoom call, but also be in your YouTube channel. So I can't thank you enough for everything.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I'm delighted that the manual was helpful and that you're doing so well. And yeah, great to have you on the channel, man. Caden, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. So as you guys heard in the intro, I'm 17. I live in Colorado. I am in love with the gym. I love playing video games. I love specifically lifting weights. In fact, that's one thing that's helped me the most with my recovery, to be honest. I love playing video games, PC gamer specifically. I love hanging out with friends. I'm a big extrovert. Whenever I have an opportunity to go and hang out with people, I do. I love driving. I got my license this year, so I've been doing that a lot as well. I love driving my stick shift. Not really mine, it's my dad's, but he lets me drive it. So yeah, those are some of the things I enjoy doing.
Wow, it sounds like you're a pretty busy guy.
Yeah, yeah. I guess you could say that.
Yeah, that's great, man. Great. This things are so back on track for you, and that you're living life to the full. That's great, man.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, for sure. So, Caden, can you tell us a little bit about your experience with DPDR and how did it start for you?
So back in October of 2021, I started using marijuana at 15. I don't advise anyone do that, obviously, but that was something that I just kind of got into. It being legal in my state, it was a lot more easily accessible. And I was just curious about the experience. I had people around me talk about them experiencing it. And so I got curious, and I remember I started smoking around late September, early October. And the last experience I had that actually started all of this was one night. I had got some of my own, and I decided, fall break was actually right around the corner. It was a week, it was a short week for school. Um, I was in public school at the time. Now I do online school, but at the time I was in public school. So we had Monday, Tuesday of school, and then the rest of the week we would just have off. And so I remember it was a Monday night, and I thought, I'll just enjoy myself. It's an easy week. I don't have really much to worry about. And so I remember smoking the weed and having a really bad panic attack that night that lasted a few hours. But then the next day I woke up, everything was normal. For anyone that might have used weed in the past, you know that when you wake up the next day, you still feel kind of out of it. You still feel almost like you're still in the high, but you're sobered up. And so I was used to that. Like I said, I've done it a handful of times. So the next day I woke up feeling that way. And as my day went on, I just kind of went throughout the day. I was calm. I was fine. Everything was good. Then fifth period rolled around and I had this wave of anxiety and panic just hit me all of a sudden out of nowhere. I didn't know, there's nothing that I did or thought of that triggered it. It almost just kind of rushed back. And I didn't even know this kind of thing was possible while sober. I thought these feelings of panic and anxiety only existed on the marijuana. And so I was very caught off guard by that. I didn't understand, And so I remember asking my teacher, I was like, can I get up and go to the bathroom? And so I went to the bathroom. Then I walked around the halls for like 15 minutes, just trying to analyze like what was happening to me. And I just couldn't put my finger on it. It was very confusing. And all throughout the rest of the day, I was fighting these feelings. I was confused. The next day, I remember was the start of the break. In fact, this is when I discovered a YouTube channel on a Wednesday. And I remember watching these videos in the evening time. And I was in denial. I was in a stage of denial. I didn't want to actually accept that I had anything wrong with me. I just thought, oh, these are feelings that'll pass, and I don't actually have any sort of disorder or condition or whatever. And so I denied that I had anything, and I was still at this heightened sense of panic and anxiety. I remember in your YouTube video when you said that you had gone through this for 2 years, I really freaked out because I was like, I can't even go another hour with this. And so I can't believe other people are out here going through it for much longer. And so I had discovered a YouTube channel, but for some reason I wasn't ready to accept the fact that it was depersonalization. And so after that, the week went on, and I still had continuous feelings of feeling like I was almost in a dream. I remember going to the mall with my dad, and we were in the Apple store, and everything around me was just very fuzzy, very blurry. I almost had tunnel vision. Um, I just had feelings that I could not explain to anybody. Um, and I was very sensitive. And it's almost like I had to be careful with the thoughts that I had because certain thoughts would just pull me in some sort of direction. And I remember I had no appetite. I would get Chick-fil-A with my dad, which was one of my favorite foods. And I couldn't even enjoy it because I would sit down and eat it and I wouldn't really taste anything or enjoy anything because of how focused I was on this condition. I think Saturday, I started to get sick. I was physically getting ill at the same time. And so that to me was just the hardest thing that I've probably ever been through in my life. That Saturday, just being physically ill, my heart rate was constantly high. I was constantly in panic. I had depersonalization. Couldn't describe it to anyone. I remember I was playing games with my friends all day, trying to distract myself because I know if I didn't, at least every second of the day, I would start to spiral into thoughts and panic and worse feelings. And so I that night actually probably had the worst panic attack out of every one of them. I was fully convinced that my body had given up on me and I was getting ready to die. I couldn't fall asleep. I had insomnia. I was afraid if I fell asleep, I wouldn't wake up. In fact, that very next day, I remember getting baptized actually and becoming a Christian to try to, um, you know, escape from this feeling. I thought, I tried so many different things to escape from these feelings. And the hardest part about that was, even on the spiritual journey that I had, reading scriptures about the afterlife and heaven would usually comfort everybody else, genuinely terrified me because I couldn't wrap my head around the concept of anything bigger than me in this universe. And so all of the philosophical things were kind of directed towards that. But the months after, I was very depressed. I had changed my life up completely. I had gotten rid of a lot of the friends that I used to have. I switched to school online, and I was trapped for a long time. I felt enslaved to these feelings. Um, it got so bad that I couldn't even walk down to our public mailbox without feeling panic symptoms because I didn't, I think my biggest fear at the time was, either passing out while I was out somewhere, just kind of losing my mind almost. I thought if I went to a certain place and I would just lose control. It was it almost felt like agoraphobia mixed with something else, but I didn't realize at the time that it was really just depersonalization, and all these feelings were just depersonalization. And so eventually in March, I discovered your manual, and I think from there everything just got better. But when I did discover your manual, I wished so much that I discovered it earlier. But yeah, so that's pretty much the beginning of the whole recovery part, and how it all started, honestly. There are a lot of things I can't remember, but I do remember a lot of the panic attack moments, and a lot of the thoughts just being directed around um just not even comprehending what life even is, and thinking that I'm just going to lose touch with reality. And um anyways, so yeah, that's pretty much how it all started, honestly.
Yeah. It's a tough experience. It's when you were describing, Caden, the having that experience in school on the first day. I mean, I remember for me when I had the first panic attack. Well, actually, the second panic attack, but after it was weeks after I had the bad weed experience. But when I had the panic attack that really set off the DPDR, I was at home in my parents' place, and I was just kind of wandering the house trying to figure out what was happening and panicking. But I can only imagine what that must have been like at school when
Mhm.
you're surrounded by your friends and teachers, and you've still got to go to class, like, and you still have to physically be there. That must have been extremely frightening. At that stage, Caden, did you link it to the weed? Did you think that this was? Did you still think it was like a weed hangover, or did you think this was just something separate that was happening, or what was your interpretation of it at that point?
I honestly thought it was the weed that somehow just changed the way I perceived the world around me. I thought, I've smoked too much, and like this was the point in time, like I crossed some sort of line, and now like everything was just different. And I thought that it would take something, I don't know what it would take to even get out of this. I didn't even think I would be able to get out of this. I thought I did too much. I just, like I said, it was almost like, because I thought, well, now I've flipped the way I see reality. And so it's almost like those pictures you look at. It's like once you see it, you can't unsee it. That was the feeling I had. I was like, now I'm seeing reality this way. I can't unsee it. And so I definitely thought the weed was had everything to do with this. I didn't even know depersonalization was a thing. Honestly, I thought it was just, I thought these feelings should only exist on the marijuana. And so I actually remember, now looking back at it, I remember thinking once marijuana left my system fully, because I think it's like 30 days before it completely leaves your system. Um, so I thought after that 30-day period, I'd feel normal again. And even after that, it didn't feel normal. And so I then started to analyze all these other things it could have been. I remember thinking I had some ear infection or something, with my balance or something. I thought it was, my joints, or I actually remember going to the doctors to get a test, how they do that little um, numbness test where they take a stick and they say, is this the sharp side or the dull side? I remember doing those tests, and I was like, well, I don't have any numbness. And so it was a very frustrating feeling because I didn't understand what it was. And I remember even going to the dentist to get a silver cap on one of my teeth, and they numbed my mouth. And I thought, well, this isn't the numbness I have all over my body. So, this is some different feeling of numbness. And so I couldn't understand. And it was very frustrating. But yeah, I definitely thought, at first, for a while, it was the weed. Then I just kind of felt hopeless because I didn't know what it was, and couldn't explain it. So
Yeah. It's such a common way of just of worrying about it, thinking like I've smoked so much weed, or I took so much weed that I've crossed a line, and I flipped how I'm perceiving reality, and I don't know how to flip it back. Like you're seeing an illusion, like, or a magic eye puzzle, and I've seen
mhm.
the other angle of it, but you can't get back to the first angle,
Yeah,
which is yeah, it's terrifying, absolutely just petrifying. But it's a very, very big overcomplication of what's actually a very, very simple process when you understand it. But
yes.
and interesting that you kind of what you mentioned as well, Caden, about worrying that it might be an ear infection. I remember thinking things like that too. I thought that, like, because I felt so completely off, that it must be something to do with my balance, like, or an ear infection. And I'd actually had I've always had like a very my hearing has always been quite sensitive, and I've had to get my ears looked at a couple of times over the years, but I was sure that that was it. Like, that must have been part of it. But then I also thought it was to do with my sight. I thought it was to do, and I mean, I thought it was every possible different thing at different points. Can you tell us more about the baptism, Caden? Was that so? Did you kind of come to the conclusion that it was some sort of a spiritual test or something, or what, or how did that come about?
Yeah, so that's actually a good. I'm glad you asked that because that definitely had a link to the depersonalization. I remember feeling that this depersonalization was actually some sort of spiritual or awakening or some sort of enlightenment in my life, or like I think Pandora's box is whatever it's called. You open it and you just discover all these new things. And so I thought this way of looking at reality was just something I was going to have to accept, and like some new realization about how everything actually is. Maybe my life this whole time was living behind some sort of veil, and I just uncovered some veil, and now I'm seeing what reality really is. And so I remember actually moments before I was baptized, I remember my heart rate was really high. I remember talking to someone about it, like what happens after I come out of the water, like, what's going to happen. And so when I did actually come out of the water, I remember having intense feelings of depersonalization, but almost some sort of calmness feeling, just because I knew that I kind of got through the experience. Because throughout the depersonalization, I wouldn't be completely calm, but I would have calmer levels of anxiety. And so I remember, just talking to people and hugging people and like just feeling a lot different, but not realizing it was just the depersonalization that had numbed me so much. I just thought maybe I just don't feel pain anymore. Like it was confused. I can't, again, I can't describe it. It's so hard to even describe. But yeah, I absolutely had a link to that. Um, and I even asked my dad over and over, thinking like, what happens when you become a Christian? What happens? What changes? And I thought at numerous times that I was being filled with the Holy Spirit. I thought I was, there are different spiritual things happening to me. What was really just the high feelings of anxiety.
Yeah, yeah. And is the bapt was it in a river, Caden, or in a bath or something, or what was it?
It was in our church building. We have a
Okay.
baptistry behind some curtains, so it was there.
Wow. And do you actually get dunked, or water on your head, or what is it?
It's a full submersion.
Wow.
Yeah, so my preacher just kind of put a cloth over my face and then leaned me back into the water fully and then lifted me out. So
Yeah. And it's such an interesting thing that, like, we tend to, like, the things that we're interested in, or the in terms of like where we are in, like, what we're interested in terms of like spirituality or religion or psychedelia, or whatever, that tends to become the story that we first attach to the DPDR. So for me, I'd been reading a lot about like psychedelic drugs, and about like Timothy Leary and Terence McKenna, and these like people who had kind of explored that stuff. And for me, it was like, well, I've flipped the switch, and I'm looking. So like that was my Pandora's box. Was like, I've messed around with this stuff, I've read about all this stuff, and now I've kind of opened this thing, and I can't get back.
mhm.
But we do tend to try to connect it to a spiritual experience or a religious experience, or a some sort of a kind of a test, like, but and in some ways it can give you some motivation to dealing with it. But again, ultimately, it's just overcomplicating what's a very simple thing. I mean, ultimately, it's the mental equivalent of like heart palpitations and muscle tension. And if you're experiencing heart palpitations and muscle tension, it's not a spiritual experience. And
Right.
and and often when we do that, when we impute a spiritual or connect a spiritual experience to it, it gives it more strength and credence than it deserves, like, you know, as opposed to simply
Exactly.
taking your attention and looking away from it. But with that said, Caden, like, so after the baptism, what was that like for you? Were you kind of like analyzing how you felt, or did you like what was the experience like afterwards?
So I definitely I had a lot of periods of time where I analyzed, I noticed some of the differences in terms of anxiety. Then I actually started to feel a little closer to being normal again for a little while. But every time I kind of do a deep dive into scriptures, I would be afraid that there's something in there that I don't want to hear, and that if I read some sort of scripture, it's going to make me come to some realization, and then the feelings would just restart almost, because of the things in there. The fear of the unknown, thinking like, when people talk about how the Bible will kind of make you feel free, or make, how you should let God control your life. I actually remember being in a conversation with my brother last year, or no, it was the beginning of this year, when I was almost recovered, but I still had a little bit of dips in the path. But him saying that he just kind of let go and let God control his life, I immediately snapped into feelings of panic. Like, I remember the panic hit me all of a sudden, and I literally thought, like, from here on out, God was going to start controlling my life. I actually remember I had distorted thoughts about time, thinking that time was just going to speed up faster and faster. The thing that people say, time gets faster as you get older. I literally thought like time was just going to just speed up super fast, and my life was just going to like almost flash. And I don't know, the thoughts sound pretty ridiculous looking back, but at the moment it felt so real. Like, it felt like I found out this is exactly what life is, and so the feelings of panic would last, and the thoughts would cycle, and eventually I just had to accept, like, okay, you know what, this is just another panic attack. I'm going to settle down. I'm just going to try to take my mind off this, and that's exactly what I did at the moment. um, so I'm happy, at least the last panic attack I had control over it. I knew exactly what I needed to do, but there was almost a nagging fear in the back of my mind, like, this is true, you're just hiding from it. It was almost that kind of feeling. And so I think that was the most disturbing part of it. And so I definitely had periods of time where I analyzed myself and thought, maybe I'm just wrong, and there's something I need to accept that I'm not accepting yet. And so that was pretty much, I hope that answered the question there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's really interesting what you say about, the getting some kind of sense of some bit of relief from the baptism, or thinking about it in that sense. But then there's this whole other set of fears that, like, well, what if I read a scripture or a piece of text from the Bible that then re-triggers it? So
Mm,
it's still kind of creating this kind of narrative of like, there's things that I have to avoid, and it's very like illustrative of the pattern of behavior that most of us get into at some point in recovery, which is like, we find these little things that work, that may reduce the anxiety to some degree, but because you're not actually addressing the cause of it and you don't really understand it yet,
mhm.
you're always going to there's always going to be something that triggers the anxiety, or a fear that sets it off. And we just kind of get into this pattern of like, we get some relief and then a setback, and then some relief and then a setback, and we think all I need to do is find the interpretation of this that works, and then I'll be able to get rid of it. And all the time we're overcomplicating again what's actually an extremely simple thing. And when we look at it as for what it is, it's just anxiety. It's not a spiritual test. It's not a religious experience. It's extremely simple. Um, but the thoughts about time as well, Caden. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Like, I had those thoughts, those types of thoughts. Absolutely, people mention them to me all the time. I thought I had like damaged my perception of time somehow. I thought like that my consciousness was like affecting time, and all this type of stuff. And I was using my memory as well. All of which feels absolutely terrifying when you're going through it. But again, the simplest possible explanation, and it's something that everyone experiences every day. Like, if you're feeling bored, time is going to feel slower to you. If you're like thoughts are racing and you're kind of extremely conscious of something, or if you're even entertained by a film, time feels like it speeds up. But it's not anything to worry about until your anxiety levels are higher than normal, and then you point at it and you say, "Oh my God, something's wrong. Time is speeding up. I'm going to my life is going to go and fast forward." This type of thing. Um,
Mm, exactly.
and Caden, can you tell us a bit about how, because you mentioned like speaking to your brother, and I know you mentioned your dad as well, but like what was it like with your family? Did they know the extent of what was happening? And how was it speaking to them about it?
So this was a very foreign concept to all of them. I had siblings that experienced anxiety when they were near my age, but nothing like this. And I remember telling my dad and him and I actually used to sit down and listen to stuff on your manual when I had to have feelings of reassurance, or I needed to put my finger on something that I was curious about. I'd listen to the manual with him, or I'd watch your YouTube videos with him on our TV in the living room, and he would gain a knowledge. He was almost kind of learning with me. Every time I'd learn something, I'd tell him. As I said, I'm a big extrovert, so anytime I learn something new, I have to go tell someone to reinforce that information. And so I remember telling him just like all the things that I've learned. My brother, I'd kind of tell him about, I figured out what the anxiety was. I kind of just told him about, how I could link it to depersonalization, and that was just a symptom. So I described it to my family. Um, yeah, so I think my dad had the most understanding, like I said, because he learned with me those things, which is good. So
How long was this, Caden, until you found the term depersonalization after it happened? Oh, and another thing you mentioned as well, you said for a while you didn't want to accept that it was depersonalization,
mhm,
and it's very interesting that you mentioned, because it's something that people have been saying to me recently, and I had the same thing, because it's like when you first read about depersonalization and you see that, like, you might go onto forums, for example, and you see that people have had this for years or whatever, and there's a part of you that just kind of refuses that and says, like, no, 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 this cannot be what that is, because I can't have a condition that could potentially last for years, because that's way too frightening. um
exactly.
but in actuality, it's like, well, no, people get, just like with all anxiety based conditions, people have them for different amounts of time. It's always temporary, it's always harmless. But often when we kind of like uh, uh, um, perceive it as being something terrifying and move away from it, it actually just kind of prolongs the experience of not tackling it head on and actually starting the process of recovery from it. But I'm
Exactly.
curious. I'm curious as to how long that process took for you, Caden.
So it took from about, so like I said, I discovered the YouTube channel a few days after. So in about mid-October, all the way through March of 2022, because that's around the time I actually got your manual. That's around the time that I came to that acceptance of this is what it is. And through that period of time, like I said, I did all these sort of tests. I looked up all sorts of things it could be. I remember at times I thought maybe I had schizophrenia. I thought at times I might have like bipolar disorder or some disorder. I think it's borderline personality disorder. There are all sorts of different analyzations I made. I was thinking like it could be all this whole range of things. And so I kind of cycled through different things. And then eventually, I remember one day telling my dad, uh, and he looked up some of the symptoms I was feeling and read online, you know, depersonalization derealization on this. I think it was like a medical website, and I kind of got brought back to your channel, and I thought, you know what, I think it is this. And when I actually, because again, it was hard for me to accept it, um, but when I finally came to acceptance, it was actually a very big relief because I was like, you know what, I think this is really what it is. It matches up with everything. And so now I can actually move forward into getting better, and not analyze it anymore because, like you said, analyzing it only was making it worse because it's not anxiety, then what is it? I remember you saying that in your manual that that's exactly the thoughts I had. But when I realized, okay, it's just anxiety, and then I can move on. I remember also kind of separating the feelings of floatiness, almost feeling high without the weed, the vision delays almost where you'd kind of reach your hand out, then you'd see yourself reach your hand out like a second later almost. That feeling I completely separated from the actual feelings of detachment because there were times where I felt like my vision and everything was in sync, but like my body would almost feel like um, still detached, or I'd still feel kind of out of body a little bit, or almost an observer. Then there were times when I panicked where I completely felt out of body and almost like I was floating around. So, but all of those were part of this under the same umbrella of depersonalization. And so that was another thing that I also had to make connections to. But I used to think that feeling of detachment was like some sort of lightheadedness, or maybe it was like some vision issue, or maybe I thought also that it was a lack of oxygen to my brain when I hyperventilated. And so those were some other thoughts I had about some of those symptoms of depersonalization. But finally connecting them all was probably, last year, beginning of this year, like all of it just clicked and made sense. And I was like, okay, and that's again, the more connections I made with everything, with all the experiences and wondering why do I feel this way, and reading your manual and a mixture of everything, and just all putting it all into one category, I realized this is the only issue that's been occurring this entire time. And so yeah, that was probably, it was last year definitely that everything started to come together. So
Um, what was your lowest point in the whole experience, Caden? Is there a particular time or incident that you remember?
I think the lowest point, so there are two things that come to mind. One of them is that Saturday. Like I said, I was getting sick and I was panicking at every moment of the day, because I really just couldn't calm down. I couldn't even calm down at all. Then there was the next year around March, April, because it actually, it kind of shifted a little bit. I used to be very afraid, but as long as I was near my dad and I was kind of, if I could go places, but as long as I was with my dad, it was okay. Then that next year, um, I could be without my dad, but I could only really be in my room. I mean, even when I was with my dad, I still couldn't leave the house. So I started to actually develop some sort of habit of staying indoors, especially because I switched to online school. So I had no reason to leave anymore. And so I think, um, I would say at that point in time, the depression was really bad because of everything I was missing out on. But the actual depersonalization at its lowest point was probably that Saturday, when I didn't know what was going on, when I had almost no knowledge, and I would just have these panic attacks and insomnia and lack of appetite and stuff like that. So yeah, probably that weekend was my lowest point.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Um, Caden, with all that said, how did your recovery start, and what did that feel like?
So my recovery started when I got your manual. When I read through them, it felt amazing when I actually got a hold of that manual. It was just like I was like, if I had this the day it started, then I would have avoided so many issues. But I remember reading that thing like just day and night. All I wanted to do was read the depersonalization manual, or actually, I listened to the audiobooks while I'd go around and do different stuff. I'd kind of, when I'd clean up, I'd listen to it. When I'd play a game, I'd listen to it. I'd just really try to reinforce that information. And it was the most helpful thing ever. Um, I actually had hope, at that point. I knew that I had a lot of work to do, but I had hope because I knew exactly what the direction I was heading towards now. And anytime I started to get sidetracked and obsessed that it might be something else, I'd bring myself back to the manual, and I'd remind myself, okay, this is all it is, just anxiety. I would have panic attacks thinking about to go crazy. I'd read the manual and think, okay, or I'd even watch a YouTube video about, why do I feel like I'm going crazy, and then realizing, oh, okay, it's not that I'm going crazy. The one thing that helped me a lot was when you said that your reality testing stays intact, because even when I had panic attacks, I remember the very last panic attack I had, which was the same night I was talking to my brother. I had that panic attack, but I still went throughout my night like everything was normal, and I could still comprehend everything that was going on around me. Reality didn't change whatsoever. I was still able to function. I was still able to think about things, even though it was very clouded and very blocked by depersonalization. If I still thought about something enough, I could still do anything, any task. And so at that point, I realized, like, you know, if I were to go crazy, I wouldn't even have thoughts about, am I going crazy and what's here? I would just be crazy. I wouldn't think this much about it. And even then, I've heard stories of people who have like schizophrenia, and a lot of the symptoms they have are very noticeable, and you can put your finger on it easily. It all simplifies down to, like, do you see things that are there, hear things that aren't there? Not, oh, am I going to start seeing things that aren't there? Am I seeing something? Is anything real? Or, am I about to hear something? Because those were the thoughts I was having more. It was an anticipation of something happening or me snapping, rather than it just happening. If the anxiety lingers for 20, 30 minutes and nothing happens, well, then it's just a sense of dread, and it's just an illusion, and rather than it actually happening, if that makes sense. So, yeah.
And the symptoms of those other conditions you mentioned, Caden, like schizophrenia, or any of the thoughts that any of the conditions I thought I had at different points as well, they have very, very clear and noticeable symptoms. And you're not only would every medical professional you spoke to be trained to see them and spot them, but like your family and friends would notice them, and you wouldn't just be able to go about your day as normal, which makes sense outside of the perspective of anxiety. But when you're going through it, you just think to yourself, well, no, I must have this. I must have some catastrophic condition. But yeah, your reality testing remains intact at all points, and it is the feeling of that you're in a dream, the feeling that the things around you aren't real, etc. That's the core of it. What did your recovery feel like, Caden, when you actually started to kind of get back to your normal day-to-day life? Was it a kind of a slow kind of change over time, or and also did you kind of maintain your school going and like socializing and exercising? Did all that stay consistent throughout the experience, or did you kind of pull back from stuff? And what was that like?
So I had moments of time. I was very up and down, personally. I would have times where I'd kind of leave social media, leave friends, because I was very intimidated by the fact of being invited to things. Um, but I slowly eased my way into it. I took it one step at a time. I made small sacrifices. So I'd get comfortable with going to my friend's house. I wouldn't want to go anywhere. The thought of going to the rec center near me would terrify me. So I tried to kind of veer his attention away from that, and I'd try to focus on just doing something around his house. So it's almost like I unlocked different places, until I could just do anything without fearing. But I would have to do different activities that I used to in order to expose myself to that again, and kind of push through the feelings of anxiety. Going on drives with my friend, where he would drive me, because he also has his license. He's had his license longer, but he would drive me around with him. And I remember I would have to sit through feelings of nearly panicking, and then eventually realizing, like, this is kind of ridiculous. Like, nothing's going to happen. And so it would start to go down. So there were some moments where I feel like I pushed myself really hard out of my comfort zone. Then others, I just kind of eased my way into it. But I noticed that the most helpful and fast parts of my recovery were from pushing through really difficult situations. But I think it really just depends on each individual, because when I say that, I just hope it doesn't scare anybody thinking like, oh, I have to climb some huge mountain to recover. Because I mean, it kind of feels that way, but again, it's one step at a time. So you just have to find ways to progress your way through it. So say you have to leave the house for 2 hours. Okay, well, I'm going to go and I'm going to focus on this. And also realizing that you're not going to be full on panicking the full 2 hours, depending on where you are in the recovery. But for me, I would go and I would actually have feelings of a lot of relief near 30 minutes, uh, near the end of where I was, because I knew that, okay, it's going to be over soon. And I got through it, and I actually felt sense of accomplishment. And so those feelings kind of were worth sitting through the pain to experience, if that makes sense. Like, I was okay with sitting through the pain because I knew that when I actually got home, I could finally just relax. And there were even points in my day and where I'd feel just complete relief, where I would be at nighttime, right before bed, or I'd play a game with friends, and I just feel complete calmness, just very in the moment. And so I would start to have certain places that were a lot more comfortable for me. I'd have certain times of my day that were a lot more comfortable for me. I remember the afternoons um, were the most difficult for me for a while. And I believe it's because of the spike in cortisol, or the peak of cortisol. I think it's like 2 p.m. Scientists say like your cortisol is at its highest. And so I think that's the reason why. But around like 2 p.m., I would probably have a lot of difficulty with the thoughts and anxieties. But even that started to fade. And eventually my entire day was consistent, and I was on task. And I would never, I'm sorry, an alarm's going off here. I would never ruminate anymore. And again, it was just very slow, and it was almost unnoticeable, to the point where I'd actually have to look back and notice how I was living my life to even realize that, wow, I'm out of this. You know, it's not like you're just going to wake up one day and it's all just going to be completely over. It's a habit that you slowly have to increment at different parts of your day. It's almost like lifting weights. You have to work on one muscle group at a time. You can't just do it all at once. I mean, you could do full body exercises, but it's a lot more exhausting. So just focus on the things that you are doing good at, and even your weak areas, and don't beat yourself up, and just be nice to yourself. And um, you'll carry through it. People think that it's just this, again, super huge mountain to climb, but it's a lot easier than you think. It just takes effort, and it'll be over before you know it, because again, I'm looking back and it's already been 2 years, and I'm like, you know, sometimes I take it for granted that I've recovered, because like you said in your manual, you get back in the swing of things and you're like, man, you know, I used to have life so much worse. I'm just happy now that I can feel peace and then calm. And so yeah, that's pretty much how the recovery felt like for me throughout the time period that it happened. So
Yeah. That's great. That's great. I liked your analogy of like unlocking different places.
mm,
It's really good. Like it's a kind of a gaming analogy, but it's like,
yeah.
if you like, for me, it was like, well, I was terrified of like driving, for example, but I found that like if I got into the car and I'd go for like a short drive and just put on music, and then a few days later I'd go for a longer drive and put on music, and then a few days later I'd go for another drive and put on a podcast, and then you just keep going, keep going, keep going, and then at some point when you get into the car, what you're thinking about is the next episode of the podcast, rather than worrying that you can't drive the car, or that or
Exactly.
you do, and you've kind of unlocked it. It's like, oh, I just don't. I worked at it, and I demonstrated to my brain that I don't need to be afraid of this happening. I don't need to be afraid of my car, in the same way that I don't need to be afraid of, I don't know, getting into an airplane, like, or anything like that. But when you demonstrate to your brain that there's no need to have anxiety associated with this, and you do that repeatedly, and your brain just says, well, nothing bad is happening and we can do this, so we'll just get rid of this anxiety. But you do unlock it, and it's just, but it's not a kind of a sudden thing. It just kind of happens. It happens in the rear view mirror. It's just like you look back and you go,
Hmm.
oh yeah, sure, that I was kind of freaking out about that for a while, but that doesn't bother me anymore. And the thing as well
Exactly.
about Caden, about like climbing a huge mountain is really, it's really interesting, because that's absolutely how it feels like. It feels like when you kind of think, well, I've so much work to do. There's this massive mountain to climb and all these obstacles. And then, but what you realize though is that in actuality, the top of the mountain is right beside you. Like, you don't, it's a distraction away. It's like, if you can train yourself to focus on something, for a couple of minutes, you're at the top of the mountain. Like you're all, it's
Exactly.
like recovery is right beside you. It's right beside you, and all that's happened is because of focusing on these thoughts, you've trained yourself to look in the opposite direction. But it's right there. It's not climbing Mount Everest. It's not an obstacle course. It's right beside you. But it feels very counterintuitive to think about it like that. But that's absolutely what it is. Um,
Exactly.
so Caden, so now that you've recovered, is normal? And it's something that people ask all the time. When you get back to normal after going through DPDR, do you really get back to normal?
Oh, absolutely. You feel, I can't say that I felt as I did before because it all started because, I mean, obviously I was younger. I knew a lot less. I'm back to normal, but I'm stronger. It's not like I was like this completely before it started. I can still remember the experiences. I can still think about everything that happened. I can still remember these feelings, talk about these feelings, but they don't trigger anything inside of me that set me off or cause me in loops of panic. And so I feel, yes, completely normal. I feel I have my life filled up with things that I enjoy and love now. And so when I look at my everyday life, the part that feels normal again is thinking about the things that I like to do, and okay, here's what I have planned for today. I'm going to go to do this with my friend, or I'm going to go to the gym, or I'm going to play a video game. In fact, I can actually wake up, and there were times this week where I've woken up actually feeling very euphoric because I knew that day I had something really exciting planned. And so those feelings again, it's almost like feeling like a kid again, just feeling like you're just alive. Life's not gray anymore. Life's not all about, I just need to recover from depersonalization. My goals have switched up, instead of thinking my goal is to recover from depersonalization, my goal is now I want to be able to get a successful job. My goal is now I want to be able to be financially secure, and I want to better my friendships. Like, in fact, if you can learn how to do that as soon as possible, I think the faster you'll recover. Because honestly, people talk about meditation and stuff. All meditation really is focus. I've done meditation practice in the past, and it's taught me, you know, I have a lot more control over my thoughts and my mind than I think. And I've literally sat in dark rooms because I've had a fear of the dark, but I've tested this where I've sat in dark rooms and my mind would start to think of all the irrational. Oh, there's monsters out here. There's something out there. Then I'd think about something that makes me really grateful, and my mind would completely shift. And it's almost like this bubble around me. It's I don't know. It's a symbolic language. None of that really, but it's focus. Your focus is everything. Your life starts to feel a lot different when you think this is contributing to me as a better person. And so again, it's a burden not feeling like, how is my depersonalization going to be today? It never crosses my mind. I just, all of the worries that I have now are worries about, am I going to get in some silly argument with my friend about this, or am I going to get in trouble? Just the normal fears you had as a kid, am I going to get in trouble at school, or am I going to get a bad grade? Like, all of those things are worries that we have, but they're worries that you can actually put your finger on and have a tangible solution towards. And it doesn't feel like some unknown problem that you'll never find the solution to. So I say that is what recovery feels like, is just everything. It's completely normal, and you're always the same person. You'll always feel like you will always be you, no matter what you go through. And now that everything's better, again, I feel stronger, I feel happier, and now I can actually make positive impact on people. And I have opportunities like this to be on your channel. And yeah, so it feels truly amazing. And it's a very big accomplishment, so.
Caden, how was the DP manual helpful in your recovery?
It was amazing. It was just like I would listen to certain audios and I would kind of gain a little bit more understanding and knowledge of certain things. I remember, so for example, there were certain audios. So I'd kind of skim through the audiobook, and a lot of the questions that stood out to me, I'd listen to first. Then I would be like, okay, I've kind of already listened to a bunch of stuff. I'm going to listen to the things that I didn't grab my attention. So like when you talked about medications, when you talked about um, the I think you talked about diet and how like chocolate or sugar can make the symptoms worse, and realizing, oh, I actually have quite a bit of sugar in my diet that I can probably cut out. And so I made small adjustments. You actually talked about SSRIs in your manual. I've actually been on SSRIs for a while now, and they're extremely helpful as well. I also was diagnosed with OCD, so that was it was for that, but it also took care of the anxiety depersonalization part. But when you talked about how they could be very helpful, they were very helpful for me. So just kind of opening my mind to the different medications that were out there, and the different diet changes and the different, things you could do. Even when you talked about video games, I completely agreed with that. That was probably one of the biggest things that took my mind off of it because I was fully engaged with it, watching a movie that I really enjoyed. Um, Having conversations with people. And so I started to open my mind to things that, what you, like you said in your manual, this works, this doesn't, this makes it worse, this makes it better. And I just started to kind of expand on what makes it better. I found things that made it better, and I expanded on those, and I found more opportunities within those things. I'd kind of just try to be as open-minded as possible and open new doors to things that could make this a lot better. And so I just think the more that you chase that and look at the path and look at, what things do I enjoy, that was just, that part of the manual was just very opening. It just opened a whole lot of recovery and success and opportunities and all that. So
That's great to hear, Caden. So what's your day-to-day life like at the moment?
so I wake up, I check my phone. I kind of, I don't know. It's debatable, but some people say it's a bad habit checking your social media first thing. But I check my social media. I just check who texts me and stuff. Then I do my schoolwork, and my schoolwork's kind of flexible. Like I said, I do it online, so I'm at home. So I'll do some classes, and then I'll go to the gym. And I'll, like I said, I'm a big gym person, so I really think a lot about the progression there. I'll watch some influencers on social media about fitness. I listen to a lot of upbeat music when I lift, so I have like these highlights of my day that I look forward to. I wake up, like I said, I go, um, I get home, I finish my school off. I get online, talk to friends, I play video games. I just really try to chill and enjoy my day. And now I've set up actually a plan with my uncle, where I go and I eat with him every Monday night. So that's going to happen tonight. So I'm looking forward to that. And Yeah, so just been talking to friends. I've been again really into. I've been looking into a lot of career path options. Looking into a lot of my interests. Just trying to get better at certain skills. I'm really skilled in certain video games. I'm trying to level up in those, and I guess I have a dream job as being a pro gamer, even though it's a really difficult thing. But um, I just try to dream big. I wake up and I just try to carve my own path in this world because in my belief, everybody has their own way of doing things and going through life and their own methods that work for them. And so there are some things that are just facts, but then our opinions make us who we are. And so it just, again, paves the way for our life. And so I'm trying to block out as much negativity as possible, keep in all that positivity, surrounding myself with encouraging friends, encouraging people, positive and funny things. Social media really helps, looking at memes on Instagram or funny videos on TikTok, anything that can just make me laugh as well. Just, yeah, so that's pretty much my day looks like. Just a really basic life, but I'm happy. I'm content. I don't need some super crazy eventful life. I'm content with how it is. So, um, anyways.
Sounds like a pretty good, decent, normal life for a 17-year-old, for average 17-year-old,
Yeah, absolutely, man.
That's
Very
great, man. That's
blessed.
great. Yeah, for sure. So Caden, there's going to be people watching this video who may be going through what you went through a couple of years ago. They may be at the start of it, maybe struggling with weed-induced DPDR. What advice would you have for those people? What advice would you have for yourself if you were to go back and have a chat with yourself at the very start of this experience?
So I would say, first things first, mental health over everything. If you feel like there's something in your life that is deteriorating your mental health, cut it off, whatever it might be. A toxic friendship, a toxic relationship, maybe if it's a drug that's being used or abused, cut it off. If you are not taking care of yourself properly, there are 5 things that I try to keep in mind to take care of yourself, and that's sleep, exercise, water, vitamins, and honestly, just friends. Just again, healthy friendships. Those are kind of the 5 main things. But I like to narrow down on how you physically take care of yourself, what you put in your body physically. Um, Exercise is one of the most helpful things. It is incredibly, I've actually seen a study, I don't know how accurate this is, but exercise for 30 days, like moderate to intense exercise for 30 days, is as effective as the antidepressant Zoloft. Don't know how accurate that is, but that is something I've heard. But I can kind of see that ever since I've gone to the gym, it's made it just a very drastic change in my recovery for the better. And so exercise, even if it's not that long, just try to get into exercising. Um, Drink lots of water. Well, I've noticed a lot of dehydration will lead to stress and high blood pressure and all sorts of different problems. So always stay hydrated, keep some water by you, always eat. If you feel like you're anxious, there's a lot of the times where I just thought, oh man, this is all coming back. But all I needed to do was just eat a simple meal and I felt balanced again. And eat something healthy, try to eat your vitamins. If you need to, you can take a multivitamin. You can drink some protein shake if you need to. If you don't have much of an appetite, get something in your system, because even vitamin deficiencies can feel just awful for your anxiety, especially vitamin D. Get your sun. If you don't get sun, if it's a time like for me in Colorado, it gets dark pretty early. And we have a lot of days where we don't have sun in the fall and winter. And so take vitamin D supplements, obviously consult with a health professional before any supplement intakes, but absolutely that helps for me as well. Medication, I also recommend. If it gets to a really bad point, I remember I didn't really want to be around medication. I just wanted to treat it all naturally. But if it's to a point where it's like you can't eat, like you're just debilitated at all times, talk to your doctor about getting on some sort of anxiety medication. Believe me, it makes a humongous difference. Therapy also has helped, just being able to go and talk to people just about what's going on in your life. Um, Obviously, Sean's manual was probably the most helpful thing. Just the baseline, everything. It was kind of the base, the foundation to the recovery. But yeah, so I would say if I had to go back and tell myself, I would say as a start, just start eating healthy, drinking water, exercising. All those cliche things you hear from doctors, follow them, because as cliche and as corny as it might sound, they're actually extremely helpful advice. Oh, and again, sleep. Sleep also makes a huge difference. When I get 5 hours, I feel awful, but when I get 8 hours, I feel like I can accomplish anything. 10 hours. Sleep is a superpower. Sleep is absolutely important. And yeah, and just do what you enjoy. Find your hobbies, stick to your hobbies. So yeah, that's the advice I would give to people.
Good advice, man. Good advice.
Thank you.
Caden, it's been so lovely speaking with you, man. Thank you for being on the channel, and I'm delighted to see that you're doing so well. I know that you went through a very difficult experience. I remember I'd reviewed some of the emails before we spoke, and yeah, you went through a tough time with it. So I'm very very glad to see this that you've recovered and things are going so well. And I know there's going to be people watching this who find it extremely helpful. So thank you for taking the time to share your story, and yeah, keep living your life, and as you say yourself, dream big.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you so much. Again, thank you for the opportunity to be on this channel. I'm really happy to help people, and you know, I'll never forget any of this, any of your manual, your help you've given me. It will always live somewhere inside me. So
that's so wonderful to hear, man. I really appreciate that. Caden, have a great day, man. It was lovely chatting to you, and take care.
thank you. You as well.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye.